The room was dimly lit, a single flickering candle casting elongated shadows on the cracked walls. Raabeya sat on the edge of the wooden stool, her hands trembling as she clutched the edges of a letter. The words blurred before her tear-soaked eyes, but the message was unmistakable. Her family was on the verge of losing everything. Her father's health had deteriorated rapidly over the past year, and the debts they had incurred for his treatment had piled high, casting a suffocating shadow over their once peaceful life. The small house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt heavy with silence. Outside, the wind howled through the narrow streets of the village, rattling the loose shutters of their windows. Raabeya glanced toward the corner of the room where her father lay, his frail body barely visible beneath the thin blanket. Her younger siblings huddled together near the fireplace, their innocent chatter a faint attempt to mask the despair that loomed over them. Raabeya's heart clenched. As the eldest, she had taken it upon herself to keep the family afloat after her father's illness, working tirelessly in the fields during the day and sewing garments late into the night. But no matter how hard she tried, the debt collectors returned, each visit more threatening than the last. It was during one such visit, barely a week ago, that the offer was made, a proposition from a man she barely knew. "Marry me, and your family's debt will be wiped clean," he had said, his voice cold and deliberate. He had arrived in the village not long ago, a stranger with an unsettling presence. Though he was wealthy, rumors swirled about him like the dust that followed his carriage. Whispers of a man with secrets darker than the night. Raabeya had laughed bitterly at the suggestion at first, dismissing the idea as absurd. How could she marry a man she didn't love, a man who seemed to carry a storm within him? But as the days passed and the reality of their situation bore down on her like a heavy weight, the idea began to fester in her mind. It wasn't just about her anymore. Her father needed medicine, her siblings needed food, their home needed to be saved. That night, sitting in the dim light of the candle, Raabeya's resolve solidified. She would sacrifice her dreams, her freedom, and her heart for the sake of her family. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. Her hands no longer trembled. Instead, they clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms as if to anchor her resolve. The next morning, Raabeya walked to the village square, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her every step. The man was waiting, leaning against the wooden railing of the inn with an air of indifference. His dark eyes met hers, unreadable as she approached. Without a word, she extended her hand, signaling her acceptance. His lips curved into a faint smile, not of joy, but of satisfaction. As the deal was sealed with the simplest of gestures, a chill ran down Raabeya's spine, a foreboding she could not shake, but she ignored it, burying the unease deep within her. For her family, she would endure anything. Even the storm she could sense was brewing within the man who would soon become her husband. Raabeya woke to the sound of her younger brother's laughter as he chased their younger sister around the kitchen. Her heart warmed at the sound, but the weight of the reality she faced soon pulled her back to the present. The morning sun streamed through the cracks in the walls, casting soft rays over the worn-out furniture, but it couldn't chase away the anxiety that gnawed at her. She forced herself out of bed and, with a deep breath, tied her faded scarf tighter around her head, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Her father, once a strong and commanding presence in their home, now barely moved from his bed. His eyes, once full of life, were now dull and clouded, the sickness slowly draining him of both strength and spirit. Raabeya hated seeing him like this, but what could she do? She'd spent every waking moment trying to find a way out of their predicament, but no solution ever seemed enough. Raabeya's gaze shifted to the small kitchen, where her stepmother, Madame Norzy, was preparing a meal. The woman's movements were swift but harsh, her presence always carrying a weight of judgment. Raabeya couldn't help but notice the way her stepmother's eyes flickered with annoyance as she caught her daughter staring. "Why do you always look so lost?" Madame Ngozi's voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "Get to work, or do you expect everything to fall into your lap like it always does?" Raabeya bit back a retort, knowing it would only make things worse. Instead, she walked over to the table where her younger siblings sat, their faces innocent and unaware of the storm that was brewing in the family's life. Her heart ached for them. They didn't deserve to suffer because of her choices, but it felt like there was no other option left. Her sister Bola looked up at her with bright eyes. "Raabeya, will you play with us today? You always seem so serious." Raabeya smiled softly, running a hand through her sister's hair. "Not today, Bola. I have to go to the market and take care of some things." Bola pouted but nodded, understanding that her older sister was always busy, always shouldering the burden of the family. It wasn't fair to them, but Raabeya had always been the one to carry that weight. She had long accepted her role as the protector, the one who made sure everything kept moving. As she stepped out of the house and into the village, her mind wandered to the stranger, the man she was about to marry. She had barely spoken to him, and yet she already knew so much about him. The rumors were impossible to ignore. He was a man of power, yes, but there was darkness surrounding him, whispers of debts paid in ways that could never be undone, and his cold, calculating nature that left no room for warmth. Yet, she had agreed to marry him, hadn't she? For the sake of her family, for the ones she loved. She found herself wondering if this was her only path, or if there was another way. But deep down, she knew the answer. There was no other choice. She had to save her family. As she walked past the market stalls, she couldn't help but overhear the chatter of other villagers. They all seemed to know what was coming. A girl like Raabeya marrying that man. It's too strange. What's she getting into? "I hear his family is cursed. He's not the kind of man you want to get involved with." The gossip was like a heavy fog that she couldn't escape, and as she continued on her way, the weight of it all felt heavier with every step. She was about to enter a new chapter of her life, but Raabeya had no idea just how much this decision would change her forever. The village of Ikenna was a place where life moved in rhythm with the seasons. The sounds of the morning were filled with the calls of chickens and the soft murmur of the village's many rivers, which wound through the land like veins of the earth itself. The earth was rich, fertile, and life was simple, yet so full of tradition and culture that it could be both a blessing and a burden. In the heart of the village, life revolved around the central square where elders gathered under the massive baobab tree to discuss the matters of the community. It was here that the important ceremonies took place, from weddings to festivals, and where the power dynamics of the village were most evident. The village was tightly knit, everyone knew each other, and everyone's business was the village's business. Raabeya's family lived on the outskirts of the village in a small compound made of mud bricks with a thatched roof. The house, although modest, was carefully maintained, as was the tradition of her people. The structure was built with a great deal of thought, respecting the ancestral ways of building that had been passed down for generations. The small garden where they grew, cassava, yams and plantains, was a constant reminder of the connection to the land, a deep and sacred bond that had existed long before Raabeya was born. The cultural beliefs of the people of Ikenna were rooted deeply in the connection between their heritage and the natural world. Many of their customs and traditions centered around the worship of ancestors and spirits of the land. When a person was born, it was said their spirit was marked by the deities of the earth, and through sacrifices, prayers, and rituals, they were meant to honor those spirits for protection and guidance. Marriage was a significant cultural event in Ikenna, often arranged by families to ensure the continued strength of the community and family line. The practice was not one of romantic love, but rather of duty and legacy. The value of a marriage was not just in the affection of the couple, but in their ability to contribute to the well-being of the family and their community. The belief in fate was ever present in Ikenna. If the community believed someone was destined to face hardship, there was little anyone could do to change it. Raabeya's upcoming marriage was seen as a necessary sacrifice for her family's survival. To the villagers, it was simply another part of the circle of life, how it had always been, how it would always be. But for Raabeya, it was an unknown, one she couldn't shake from her mind as she prepared to step into it. Raabeya's heart pounded as she stood at the edge of the river, her thoughts tangled in uncertainty. She had always been the obedient daughter, following her stepmother's harsh demands, doing what was necessary to help her family survive. But now, her life had taken an unexpected turn, and the weight of it threatened to crush her. Her father's illness had left the family in crippling debt, and the only way to secure the future of her siblings and her home was for Raabeya to marry a man she had never met, someone whose name had only just been whispered to her by her stepmother. The man was rich, powerful, and most importantly, willing to offer a generous dowry that would erase their debts and restore some stability. It was a transaction, not a union of love. Despite the promise of financial security, Raabeya couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her. Her stepmother's cold indifference made it clear that Raabeya was merely a pawn in her strategy for survival. As she prepared to marry a stranger, Raabeya's mind raced with questions. Who was this man? What kind of life awaited her with him? She had been given no answers, only the demand to comply. The days leading up to the wedding were fraught with tension. In the village, whispers of Raabeya's arranged marriage stirred curiosity, and jealousy from the women in her community bubbled to the surface. They spoke of the fortune she would gain, but also of how a poor girl like her could suddenly be swept into the world of the wealthy. Some of the village girls looked at her with disdain, their eyes sharp with envy, while others, like Bola and Chiner, gossiped behind her back, eager to see her fail or be humiliated. Raabeya tried to ignore the stares and the cruel comments, but they ate away at her. She had never been the type to seek attention, but now, her every move felt like it was being scrutinized. The other women were quick to remind her of her low status, constantly pointing out her humble upbringing and her family's desperation. They spoke as if her marriage was a betrayal of everything she stood for. Despite these whispers, the man she was to marry arrived days before the ceremony. His presence in the village was overwhelming. His clothes, his manner, his confidence. To the villagers, he was a prince in the truest sense, a man of wealth and power. His gaze upon Raabeya, though kind, made her feel small. His silence in the face of her discomfort only fueled her fears. What if this man had his own secrets? What if he was not the man he appeared to be? On the night before the wedding, Raabeya's stepmother, Madame Noy, cornered her in the house, her voice low and harsh. "Remember your place, Raabeya. Tomorrow you will do what is necessary. You will marry him, and you will make this family strong again. Don't you dare disappoint me." The words felt like a heavy stone in Raabeya's chest. She was being asked to marry a stranger, to bind herself to someone she knew nothing about, all for the sake of her family's survival. Yet, as much as the pressure weighed on her, she could not ignore the part of her that longed for more. Could there be love in this arrangement? Could she ever truly feel free? Or was this life of obedience and sacrifice her fate? As the wedding day approached, her nerves only grew. Raabeya's once hopeful heart had turned to stone, hardened by the circumstances surrounding her. She wanted to believe in the possibility of a new life, but doubt clawed at her from every side. Would the man she was about to marry live up to the promise he had made to her stepmother? Or would he be yet another man who used her for his own gain? It was clear now that the conflict she faced was not just the struggle to marry a stranger. It was the fear of losing herself in the process, the fear of becoming nothing more than an instrument of survival in a world that seemed to have no room for her dreams. But Raabeya was no stranger to hardship. She had survived her stepmother's cruelty, the ridicule of the villagers, and the endless demands of her family. And if she had to marry this stranger to protect her family, she would do it. But she swore to herself that she would hold on to the part of her that still dreamed. Little did she know, the man who would become her husband harbored a secret that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, family, and survival. The tension between them would only grow as the veil of mystery surrounding him began to unravel, revealing a darkness that Raabeya never could have expected. Raabeya sat by the flickering candlelight, her hands trembling as she clutched the letter she had found hidden in her husband's study. The words on the paper were like a dagger to her heart, each sentence unraveling the man she had married and the life she thought she had been building. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was an act of deception so deep that it threatened to destroy everything she had ever known. The truth was out now. Her husband, the man who had promised to save her family, was not who he appeared to be. He was a ruthless businessman with a dark past, one that had involved illegal dealings, financial manipulation, and a string of broken promises. The dowry that had saved her family from ruin had come at a price that her husband had planned to collect through a dangerous arrangement with her stepmother. They had used her as a pawn in a high-stakes game of power and control, and Raabeya had been blind to it all. As the truth crashed over her, Raabeya felt an overwhelming wave of rage and betrayal. She had married this man believing in the lie that he could offer her and her family a better life. She had trusted him, trusted the promises he had whispered to her in the dark, and now she was left with nothing but the bitter taste of deceit. But this moment, as painful as it was, ignited something inside of her. Raabeya had always been a survivor. From her earliest memories, she had fought against the odds to protect her family, to make sure that they had what they needed to survive. She had lived her life under the thumb of her stepmother. But now, as the weight of her husband's betrayal crushed her spirit, she felt a fire awakening within her. She could no longer stand idly by, waiting for things to change. She had to act. She had to take control of her own fate. Raabeya's love for her family had always been her driving force, but now she understood that true strength came from within herself. The power she had given to others, the power she had given to her husband, had been misplaced. She was not just a pawn in their game. She was a woman capable of making her own choices, capable of rewriting the story of her life. With a newfound determination, Raabeya made a decision that would change everything. She would confront her husband. She would expose the lies he had woven and take back her life, no matter the cost. The stakes were high. Her family's future, her sense of self, and her very soul were on the line. But Raabeya had reached a breaking point, and she knew there was no going back. The confrontation was inevitable. She had planned every word, every move, knowing that the truth would break her husband's facade wide open. The night she chose to confront him, the house felt colder than it ever had before. The walls, once filled with the warmth of hopes and dreams, now stood as silent witnesses to the unraveling of her marriage. Raabeya walked into the study where her husband sat, his face calm, almost too calm. He was waiting for her, sensing the tension in the air. The words she had rehearsed escaped her lips, sharp and deliberate. She told him everything she had learned, every truth that had been hidden from her. His silence spoke volumes, his eyes betraying a flicker of panic, but Raabeya didn't falter. She was no longer the timid woman she had been when they first married. "Why, Raabeya?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of frustration, but she could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed world. "Because I've learned the truth," she replied, her voice steady and fierce. "I've learned that you never cared for me. You never cared for my family. We were just a means to an end for you." The weight of her words settled in the room, and for the first time, Raabeya saw the man she had married for who he truly was. Someone who had hidden behind charm and lies. Someone who had manipulated her trust for his own gain. But even as the truth tore through her, Raabeya stood tall, refusing to back down. She knew that her life would never be the same. But in this moment, she realized that she had regained something far more precious than security or wealth. She had reclaimed her own power. In the end, Raabeya's actions were not just about exposing her husband's lies. They were about taking control of her own destiny. She had chosen resilience over submission, and in doing so, she had written her own story. No longer a victim, Raabeya emerged stronger than she had ever been before, ready to face whatever came next. The love she had once sought in a marriage built on lies was now replaced by the unwavering strength of a woman who had learned to trust herself above all else. And as the final pieces of the shattered facade fell away, Raabeya knew that she was free, not just from her husband's deceit, but from the limitations of the life she had once believed she was trapped in. Raabeya stood at the edge of the village, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue across the fields and the river that wound through the land. The air smelled of fresh earth and the scent of jasmine flowers, a reminder that, despite everything, life was still beautiful. The woman who had once felt trapped by her circumstances, suffocated by the weight of her family's debts and her marriage to a man she thought she could trust, was now free. The confrontation with her husband had been the beginning of a new chapter. As the truth came to light, her husband was forced to face the consequences of his actions. The facade he had carefully built over the years crumbled, and with it, his influence over the family. He was taken away not by Raabeya's doing, but by the law that had finally caught up with him. His dealings had been far-reaching, and his deceitful empire had unraveled faster than he could have ever imagined. Raabeya's stepmother, too, was forced to face her own truths. Once a woman of manipulative power, she had lost her grip on the family and the control she'd once wielded over Raabeya's life. With the revelation of the conspiracy, she was left with nothing but her own guilt and regret. Raabeya could no longer see her as the villain of her story, but as a woman who had once been lost and who had now lost everything she thought she controlled. For the first time in her life, Raabeya felt no bitterness, only a quiet, hard-earned peace. As for Raabeya, her strength had become her greatest asset. The villagers, who had once whispered behind her back, now looked at her with respect. She was no longer the quiet, docile woman who had walked into a marriage full of promises only to find them shattered. Now, she was a symbol of resilience, of courage, and of the power of self-discovery. She didn't need a prince or a savior. Raabeya had become her own heroine, and that realization brought her more satisfaction than any wealth or status could ever have. She had fought for herself, for her family, and for the truth, and now she was free to live life on her own terms. With the family's debts cleared and their lives now secure, Raabeya decided to follow a path she had always dreamed of but had never dared to pursue. She would open a small business, a modest shop that sold handmade crafts, herbs, and remedies passed down through generations. It wasn't much, but it was hers. It was her way of finally taking control of her life and her future. As Raabeya stood by the river, watching her younger siblings play by the water's edge, she felt the weight of the past slip away. Her younger brother Kofi, who had always been shy and unsure of himself, was now a spirited boy full of life, his laughter echoing in the air. Her sister, Amara, was helping to gather the herbs for her shop, her hands steady and sure. The change in them was a direct reflection of Raabeya's strength and resilience. She had not only saved herself, but she had given them the confidence to live fearlessly as well. The moral of Raabeya's journey was clear to all who knew her. Strength comes from within, and sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight for ourselves. In the face of betrayal, deception, and hardship, Raabeya had discovered a truth far greater than any lie her husband or stepmother could tell her. She had found her own worth, her own power, and in doing so, had transformed her life from one of submission to one of purpose and independence. In the end, Raabeya's story was not just about survival, but about the triumph of the human spirit. It was about refusing to let anyone, not even the ones we love, define who we are or what we deserve. The love she had sought from others, her husband, her family, was now replaced with the deep, unshakable love she had for herself. And so, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Raabeya stood tall, a woman who had reclaimed her future, her family, and her heart. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she was no longer afraid. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage and resilience that had brought her this far. The story of Raabeya was not just a tale of loss and betrayal. It was a story of rebirth, of hope, and of the endless possibilities that arise when one dares to believe in their own power. Raabeya's journey teaches us a profound lesson about the power of self-discovery and resilience. Throughout her struggles, she learns that the strength to overcome life's greatest challenges lies not in the people around us, but within ourselves. Her story is a testament to the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the world is against you. It reminds us that no matter how dire the circumstances may seem, there is always a way to reclaim our power and shape our own future. The story also underscores the idea that the true measure of success isn't found in external validation or material wealth, but in our ability to stay true to our values, embrace our personal growth, and take ownership of our lives. Raabeya's courage to walk away from a toxic marriage, confront deceit, and create a new life for herself serves as an inspiration to anyone who feels trapped by their circumstances. As we reflect on Raabeya's story, let it serve as a reminder that we all have the strength to change our lives for the better, no matter what obstacles we face. Life is not about being perfect, but about learning, growing, and becoming the best version of ourselves. If you found Raabeya's journey inspiring, take a moment to reflect on your own life. What are the battles you're fighting? How can you reclaim your power and create the life you deserve? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about resilience and the importance of self-love. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more empowering stories like Raabeya's. Let's spread the message that we are all capable of overcoming adversity and becoming the heroes of our own lives.